Beef. You guys know I love beef. And this is one of my favorite beefs. This was so inevitable that Al Sharpton, the Reverend Al Sharpton, number 29 on the beef list. So Al Sharpton and I had beef long before we ever met. Al Sharpton, just his whole public persona puts me at odds with him. But things really heated up in 2006, 2007. The Don Imus controversy that ended Don Imus's popular radio show in New York, where Don Imus talked about the Rutgers women's basketball team and referred to them as nappy-headed hoes. I wrote a column for the Kansas City Star at that time that basically said, hey, look, man, Don Imus is irrelevant to black people. We don't listen to his radio show. He has no clout, influence, traction with black people. Who cares what he says? I care more about what these rappers say about black women and black people, and we need to address that. That column caused a commotion all over the country, made Oprah Winfrey bring me out to Chicago and put me on her show 2 days in a row. And Al Sharpton argued the other side of that controversy. He was defending or leading the attack on Don Imus and leading the people that were calling me crazy, and how dare Whitlock point out what black people do when Don Imus said X, Y, and Z. Al Sharpton, he was not in studio with us. He was on via Skype or satellite into the studio, where myself and Russell Simmons, the rap mogul, and other people were on stage and part of this big discussion. Oprah actually agreed with me, and that's why she had me on to make that argument. But anyway, that is what heightened my feud and beef with Al Sharpton. At some point, I think within that same 12-month period, the Jenna 6 controversy kicked off in Louisiana, in Jenna, Louisiana. For those of you that are young or don't remember, Jenna 6 was 6 black boys in Louisiana that nearly beat to death some white kid at some party, and they concocted some story, not the kids, but other people, Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, they concocted some story that the black kids beat up the white kid 4 or 5 months after the school didn't do anything about a noose being hung on a tree on school property, and that's why there was all this tension, and that's why the kid got beat up. It was all a bunch of garbage and malarkey. And so at some point, the Duke lacrosse, remember that deal? Duke lacrosse, they allegedly raped some black stripper, and I started calling BS on the whole Duke lacrosse situation. This all happened within a relatively close time frame. Duke lacrosse, Don Imus, Jenna 6, and it just put me at odds with Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson. I started calling them domestic terrorists. But here's a clip of me and Al Sharpton on CNN, hosted by Soledad O'Brien, talking about the Duke lacrosse case.
Do you think that there should have been people marching and calling for justice for them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You must maintain the moral high ground. You must have some consistency about you. Injustice for one is injustice for all. Those young men were exploited the same way these young basketball players have been exploited by Jesse and Al. They run around the country exploiting these young people. making problems making the problems much bigger than what they should be. These 3 kids down at Duke, these basketball players have been used and exploited, and it's unfortunate.
Well, we're out of time, but I'm going to let you respond for a second.
I think, first of all, the young ladies spoke for themselves and their gratitude to us. You've never heard people that we fought for say that there's always guys that are not in the ring that want to call the fight.
Yeah, I'm not in the ring because I'm not running around being a domestic terrorist trying to stir up racial animus among people. That's what Al Sharpton's been doing his entire career. He and I, now for 2 decades, have been sparring and battling back and forth. I will say this in all sincerity and just transparency and authenticity. When my cousin was killed in 2012 by law enforcement officials in Indianapolis. And Tom Butler, many of you have heard me talk about him. Al Sharpton did reach out to me and ask if there was anything he could do. And I can remember in that time of grief, I was touched by that, but I wasn't interested in Al Sharpton coming to Indianapolis and drumming up a bunch of trouble and not getting us anywhere near the truth about the tragedy that befell my cousin. Just want to mention that in all transparency and just authenticity. But I'm not an Al Sharpton fan. Al Sharpton is a disgrace. He's used Jesus and a title as a minister to promote a level of racial division and animus and distrust and wickedness that I believe he will be judged harshly for by our Creator. He's the perfect person for me to have beef with. He represents one way of thinking. I represent something completely different. He thinks that race defines everything, and that race and racial animus are the greatest tool of power and control. And I just happen to think that Jesus Christ, a biblical worldview, is the greatest thing, the greatest controller, determines your destiny. And I've just never understood why someone would call themselves a minister, someone would pretend that they're honoring the legacy of MLK or any of these past ministers and preachers that have accomplished some positive things here in this country. To see Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson dishonor that legacy is disgraceful for me. And so it's with great pleasure I mark Al Sharpton as number 29 on my beef list.